Okay, this step we're going to be exploring something we commonly see on the internet used quite a bit, and that is the idea of one select list. We choose an option, and then the next one in a series will have a filtered set of options for us, right? Cascading drop-down list. Very familiar, I think, to most people. Would be the kind of interface you see on like a automotive website where you choose first of all out of a drop-down, the make, right? And then once you choose the make, then the next one fills with options of the different models of cars by that make. And then you might choose a model of vehicle, and then after that you're choosing different trim levels and so on, right? So that's the kind of thing that we're going to do here. But the kind of a neat thing about it is it doesn't really involve anything new that we haven't done before. We've already had some experience, pulling out data into a select list and then supplying it in JSON format directly to a call from the client side and doing that in the background, right? So that's basically going to be the approach we're going to take. While we do this, though, it's an opportunity to introduce something else that we haven't done very often. That is use a string. Yes, a string as the primary key, right? The vast majority of all of our entities, we've been using the same approach, usually an integer identity primary key. But there are other choices, too, that are automatically generated values that the system creates for us, things like GUID, like globally unique identifiers and so on. And there's other schemas you can put in place as well. However, sometimes a string is just exactly the right solution for us. So when does it actually make sense to use a string? Well, if any or all of these, okay, fit the situation, then it's a good reason to do it, right? Now, first of all, you actually have to have something that is going to make a good, usually obvious surrogate key, right? Some string property that's guaranteed to be unique. That's the most important fundamental thing. We know a primary key must be unique. So if you don't have something that guarantees uniqueness, then don't go any further, right? Now, just the example we're going to put in place in Canada, Canada's provinces and territories, I'm just lumping them all together, and there's a 2-letter code for each, and those 2-letter codes are guaranteed to be unique, right? So that satisfies our requirement here. There's little need to have primary keys automatically generated. In other words, for example, think of our provinces. We don't very often add new provinces to the system. And if we did, we could easily provide a new 2-letter unique code for it. There's no doubt about it, right? So it's not something like the automatically generated primary keys are fantastic when the system is just cranking out new records all the time, right? But things that are pretty static, like this list of provinces, perfect for this kind of situation. And it's also especially useful if, as a foreign key, the string property that we're going to put there is a nice presentation or representation, okay, of the actual entity itself. So, in our case, that 2-letter code, ON for Ontario, for example, well, that's often all we need to show in a address, for example, right? We don't really need to show the full word Ontario. So just having that foreign key value there is a real advantage because we can do a nicely formatted summary, you might say, like Port Colborne, ON for Ontario, and all that information is contained right in the one entity. We don't need any outer joins or inner joins or any kind of join, right? And of course, anytime we do a dot include, there's a join involved and things like that. Okay, so that's all the topics we're going to cover with this example. So I have the code here. You can follow along with it. And I have the last version of our medical office that we were working on. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do then is I'm going to have to get a few new things in place. What I thought we would do is we're going to see if, as a scenario here, that we're going to actually have our provinces and cities. And the idea is that we're going to actually track the city where the doctor, where their license was issued, where they were when their license was issued. Okay, I know it's kind of silly, but I had to kind of come up with some idea so I could tie it into the medical office example, okay? So, that's kind of right here, right? We'll start off with a simple demo, okay, where the doctor was issued the license. That's what we're going to keep track of. So let me just move that back off to the side, right? And our primary key for the city, or for the province, is going to be the actual 2-letter code. So I'm going to need, first of all, a couple of new models, right? We'll have to add those in. So I'll just add the class here for province. And one, of course, for city as well. Okay, So coming back to province, we'll get the properties that I think we're going to need in place here, and we can talk a bit about the annotations we're using, right? So the ID, so here's the interesting one. So I want to point out this, the fact that it's a primary key, we're following the standard naming convention, right? Remember that is that we can either just use the letters ID or the class name with ID at the end. So I could do province ID and the system would still understand that I intend this to be the primary key, right? The fact that it's a string instead of an integer makes no difference as far as that naming convention for identifying a primary key is concerned. Now, of course, if I didn't want to follow the naming convention, I could annotate it in here as a key or do that inside of the actual Fluent API. All right, so here's my string ID, my new string primary key. So I have a display property, 2-letter province code. It's required, of course. You have to have values for all primary key values, right? The string length 2, that just affects, in our case, mainly the amount of characters you're allowed to input in the user interface. And I have a regex here, just say it must be 2 capital letters, right? That's what that's accomplishing there. And then we have the name for the province, right? That's just a string here. I'm allowing up to 50 characters. And this is a nice navigation property to include. It's not necessary to have the one-to-many relationship, but it helps. So we can include all the cities in a province if we so desire, right? Okay, now coming down to the city, a couple more things to put in here as well. Let me just get my code. Okay, so first of all, let's come down here. So, let me point out this. Once again, we're going with our naming convention, just ID for the primary key, but it is int, okay? So it automatically will do the integer identity for us, okay? All right, so we have a name property, okay, string length, it's required, etc. We have the foreign key, the province ID, right? And of course, we have our actual province object, okay? And that's basically what we need there. Now, we're going to have an I collection here of doctors. That's because we're relating it back, in our case, to the actual, as we said, the location where the doctor was when they were first issued their medical license, right? So we're relating it back to doctor. Now, we threw in a summary property here, okay, comprised of the name and the province ID. Yes, so what I want to point out about that is both of these properties are coming internally within the class. They're both right here. We don't have to, do a dot include or, go out anywhere outside of this class itself to get all the information we need for this summary property. So that's a very nice thing that we actually can do that, and it's all with internal values. I'll just point out before we go on, notice I've also added this to the summary property because that's what I'm often going to show on the screen, right? I can do a null display text here as a display format so that if this is null, right, then because maybe there isn't a city assigned, right, to a doctor or something like that, then it will have this text, no city specified. Okay, so one more thing we have to do, we have to relate it to the doctor to match the scenario that we said we were going to put together here. So I can come down here, throw in just the little bit of code we need here. Now I'm making it a nullable foreign key because I don't want to worry about having to have a city assigned for every doctor. We might need to add a new doctor to the system, and we don't know yet at this point in time what the answer is to the question, what city were they in when they got licensed, right? So we can come back and fill that in later, right? So it's public city, that's, as we know, the key property that actually defines the relationship. But we're going to have a nullable int for the foreign key, right? And away we go. Okay, now, that's good, but we're going to have to do some work, of course, in our DB context as well. I'm just saving all of that. Coming back to the medical office context. We obviously need a couple of more DB sets to work with so we can query them directly. All right. And we do need some work in our Fluent API. Because one of the things I didn't mention it earlier, but you probably even thought of it all on your own, is the fact that the combination of the name of the city and the province should be unique, right? That's the way it actually works in the real world. For example, there can be a number of cities inside a country that have the same name. but not in the same province or territory. Even two that pop into my mind right away just from living in Prince Edward Island for a number of years. In PEI, there's a place name called Toronto, and there's one called Stratford, for example, right? So that's perfectly allowed, okay, as long as they're in separate provinces. So the combination of the two is what we have to make unique. All right, one more thing, just for the cascade delete business. There we go. Okay, this is pretty standard. We're just basically preventing cascade delete between province and city. So in other words, if there are any cities in the system in a given province, then we won't be allowed to delete the province, right? We'll be prevented. Pardon me, a sneeze was coming on there. Okay, so we'll be prevented from deleting a province if there are any cities there. All right, now do we have to worry about anything else? No, because of a nullable foreign key, we're good there. All right, between doctor and city. Now, we probably will want some seed data as well, right? So I'm going to come in here and just throw some in. Okay, so here, I'll just point out that as we're adding the different provinces, notice we're supplying the two-letter primary key, right? The two-letter code that represents each one. Now, I think I have them all right. I did actually do some research and check that I have the correct two-letter codes, because there were a couple I couldn't guess on my own. For example, Quebec, you'd think like QU or something if you didn't know any better, but I found out. So it is QC and things like that, right? Most of them are pretty obvious, like ON for Ontario and so on and so forth, BC for British Columbia, right? But there you are. So there they all have their not automatically generated, the supplied two-letter string primary keys. Now for the cities, okay, of course the foreign key, we're supplying the values appropriate here as well. All right, so that gives me just some data to start with, enough to finish the demonstration. Okay, I'm just going to save it. Because the foreign key in the doctor is nullable, I don't have to worry about seeding any data for that. All right, now I will need to have a new migration though, right, to actually create my new DB sets and all that. So this might be a good time. I'm going to actually, I'm happy with everything so far. I don't want to roll back any of my design changes, so I'm going to actually go ahead and delete the medical office migrations folder. The database is not even here right now, or otherwise I could just delete it as well. And I'm going to open my common commands and just re-up, so to speak, or restart the whole series of migrations. Going to the package manager console, of course, I can just paste in my command to create my new initial migration. By the way, the word initial is just, I could call it anything I want. I could call it eat stew on Sunday. It wouldn't matter, right? It's just a name. We often use the name initial. Oh, build failed. There you go. So I probably in my copy paste missed a curly brace or added one that I shouldn't have. So I'll just do a quick rebuild here, find the issue. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I had one too many curly braces there, okay, in my province class. So let's just do a build just to make sure that passes again. Okay, all right, so we succeeded there, so I can come back. I can just use up arrow to bring back my last command, press enter, and there we go. So this should add my migration. All right, and of course we know one of the things I want to do, I want to add my extra migration steps here. So my little trick, I usually shrink down the up, set the insertion point in front of the down, expand that again, hit 4 up arrows, 1, 2, 3, 4, press the N key, and that gives me a nice spot right at the very end to actually put the command here to call the extra migration steps. Doesn't hurt reviewing these things every once in a while anyway. Okay, so that'll run next time I run. Actually, that gives me a moment to talk about something. You know, now that we actually have count them, two DB contexts that we're using actively, and we have initialization code for both, it's good to remember exactly how that all works together, right? Right here at the end of program.cs, after we have everything else ready, we call the initialization. The order I'm doing them in this case doesn't actually matter, but you should be aware of it, right? Because, for example, I'm calling the medical office initializer first, and then the one for the application DB, our security identity system, right? So inside each of those migration folders, or initialization folders, I should say, not folders, I mean files, right? Classes. Just to point out here, in the application DB one, what I'm doing second, we're just calling migrate, right? Whereas in our medical office one, at the very beginning, here's where I do have, now they're commented out, I'm just calling migrate, which is perfect, that's all I need right now. But if you ever did want to use code to delete the database and reapply migrations or whatever, right? Remember, you should only ever do it in one, right? Which is why it's good I don't even have the code commented out at all over here in application DB initializer, right? So I don't accidentally, because this one runs after. If I put the code here to delete the database so I could reapply migrations, well, then I would have lost all the work that I did in this initializer file. Just, that's a side point, but a point of caution. Just always think about that in the order that you're doing things these days. Okay, all right. So that's basically, getting everything in place. We're ready to actually start adding the cascading drop-down list implementation. So I might stop and start the recording just to break it up a little bit.